The villain's path is my equivalent of someone else's hero's journey, because I've never been the hero of my own story. I've said this already, haven't I?
God left me unfinished!
This is Phantom Ruby Miller. Her entire gimmick centers around being a living meme, with her typically saying a quote from one of Filthy Frank's videos. I only featured her in one other video of mine, and she was amid a series of skits intended to make fun of her initial namesake, a character from a show I used to respect. I stopped respecting the show when one of its authors died, and when the other showrunners decided to dangle his corpse in front of this cursed world. I resent the alive showrunners for, at minimum, being complicit with the abuse levied at some of the people Dead Guy was close to. I refuse to say Dead Guy's name, because grifters from the anime community have run it to the ground. I had planned to use Phantom Ruby to discuss Francis of the Filth, a novel which takes place in the shared collective universe of a YouTuber who called himself Filthy Frank. In essence, the novel was the equivalent of a pair of intertwined episodes of his show. The first part would be Filthy Frank's origin story, something he never fully divulged in the YouTube videos proper, and for good reason. The second part adapted previous YouTube videos made, almost as if the point of the book was to make an homage to them. This book was the last thing George Miller made for the Filthy Frank universe, before ending it on the basis of disinterest in the style of videos he would do for the Filthy Frank show, and his falling physically ill from performance within. Filthy Frank was a performance act intended to be the butt of his own jokes, in part because of the character's own bizarrely kept-together set of beliefs which were supposed to be framed as wrong. To emphasize how wrong he was, he would be accompanied by a colorful cast of characters, namely Pink Guy, who would help enable the audience to see Frank's wrongness, or his filth as the series takes to calling it, laid bare before them. Making a persona so dark and so wrong it causes you physical illness is not something to be taken lightly. In the dawn of an age of parasocial relationships and familiar strangers which YouTube was cooking up, Filthy Frank was an entity I needed to see. I liked him, but because I saw what George Miller was doing up front. He condemned right-wing edgelords in a funny way. So here's an excerpt of Loser Reads Hater Comments. So you already know Filthy Frank considers himself a loser. And he's dealing with at least one hater comment, in particular for prey sniping, which is pretty ableist. Here's how he responds to it.
Okay, first of all, I don't think IQ is calculated in size, so you kind of dropped the ball there, dipshit. So let's go on their profile and see what kind of videos they think are ideal. Prey sniping, subscribe to a channel. Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science. The thinking atheist. Oh man, we're in for a fucking treat.
A more sophisticated essayist would probably just call this satire. I would agree. Satire is a technique employed by writers to expose and criticize foolishness and corruption of an individual or society by using humor, irony, exaggeration, or ridicule. So, what is Filthy Frank, and by proxy the book adaptation, satirizing? Filthy Frank was made at a time on YouTube where people would use their webcam and talk to their audience with an element of quote-unquote realness implied to the discussions. These discussions would be logged via video, hence the term vlog. People like Onision and PewDiePie started getting famous off this. Their off-kilter comedy was often shared among an audience comprised of children. The downside was these dramatis personae had an edge to them, often replicated by the children at the expense of whomever was not in on the take. And these children would grow up thinking these people regarded them well, and I have contempt for the dramatis personae for egging people onto having this culture of stalker fans, or I guess stands, since the term will likely show up to ruin my dinner. Satire goes for the throat, lest it be mistaken for its target. Satire is usually evoked in the narrative framing of a work, usually trying to describe itself as such. I will let Renegade Cut define narrative framing, since he gets it.
Narrative framing tells us with whom the audience is meant to sympathize and the messages the media is communicating or even endorsing.
It's remarkably difficult to advertise something as being satire. Part of this is because contrarians in conversations use "maybe it's satire" as a defense of something which may have elements of comedy in them, but are otherwise explicitly not satires. Usually the phrase, "maybe it's satire," is intended to fire a rocket launcher at a conversation, leave a smoldering crater where it once stood, and persuade people to not think or talk about the bad elements of whatever was discussed. If the term, "maybe it's satire," isn't what causes a plane to crash into a conversation with intent on there being no survivors, it's often a synonymous throwaway phrase.
It's a cartoon!
There does exist a subset of people who say something is satire and are not trying to murder a discussion in bad faith. Hi, TV tropes. Christ, this is awkward. TV Tropes was originally a Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan site. Then, they turned their sights towards everything else related to television in general, and afterwards they went after every other form of media imaginable. The website had become so commonplace, so ubiquitous, so massive during the turn of the 2000s, I could not avoid it. I absolutely wanted to, for the sake of keeping some integrity as a story writer. Over time, I decided to begrudgingly accept TV Tropes as a force of good. My last interaction with it was enlisting some of its pages to help me with Forged Within Flame is garbage, here's why. Because I needed immediate shorthand to visually express my infinite anger towards Forged Within Flame being an absolute disgrace to all literature I have ever read. The only other time where I was hostile towards something and later grew to appreciate and befriend it was Megatokyo, a webcomic which I did not think was impressive at first, when I was 11 years old. It took me time to find the gold within Megatokyo, and then I recognized a primal desire for more. So I dug and dug and dug and dug and I dug and dug and dug and dug and I... Yeah, Megatokyo is good, or at least it becomes good. It's something I cannot say about other webcomics. My year of spree reading them was 2013, because I gradually got fed up with crypto-Nazis who were getting fat off of making fun of the medium. These crypto-Nazis, known as shitty webcomics, just wanted an easy target and found some which the average Tumblr user would not care about. It's hard to find good criticism of webcomics nowadays, and I have not found a good counterpart to shitty webcomics. I like to think Harrington Splimby, or I guess HH Bomber Guide to the average YouTuber, was my way to finding a superb assessment of what was wrong with Control-Delete and other comics similar to it. I feel a compulsory need to mention the Control-Delete video Splimby produced was an isolated incident, which I feel will not be repeated anytime soon. Not like I'm any good at analyzing webcomics. I only like one, and it feels as if I ran into it by awkward coincidence. My biggest grievance with TV Tropes is it is the perfect example of trying to put objective analysis into everything. The site's very rules are so arbitrarily skewed towards enlightened centrism, I have to ponder if the people running it know bias is an inevitable part of human nature which should be embraced, rather than eschewed. I have to assume they follow objectivism with a capital O. Objectivism is the belief that certain things, especially moral truths, exist independently of human knowledge or perception of them. Some shows, be they by design or mistake, cannot have value assigned to them that way. South Park is the best example I can think of where objectivism is inherently wrong. There's a specific self-referential episode, The Tale of Scroty McBoogerballs, which spells out South Park's mission statement by using the book within the show as a prop. It viciously shuns the need to assign value to something which does not have it in the first place, because it is framed as a book written by 4 10-year-olds who were disappointed in Catcher in the Rye not being edgy enough for their liking. The Tale of Scroty McBoogerballs, and by proxy South Park as a whole, exists entirely to be as vulgar, offensive, and disgusting for its own sake. The text of the episode says as much. The episode condemns subtext, so there is none of that to speak of here. And I am absolutely not taking the time to go over paratext if the text says exactly what it is and spells it out so tactlessly. I watched 14 seasons of South Park in one day, entirely on a whim. I have no personal attachment to it. Even if I did, any love of the show I would have possessed was ruthlessly demolished by season 15. I am not convinced it's improved since. Despite it having outlived its usefulness to me, and presumably others, I can safely say South Park is satire. At minimum because the show criticizes contemporary American pop culture during the course of its entire runtime. It is not smart about its criticisms, but saying it is not satire just because it is not good would be disingenuous, on top of being the opposite sentiment I am trying to convey. Wait, this is supposed to be about Francis of the Filth. Damn it. So, cards off the table, no script, no nothing. Yeah, I think the audience will get that I meant to say cards on the table rather than cards off the table. I don't think it matters. Francis of the Filth is an okay book, but it's not perfect. Its unique trait is that it is a book adaptation of a bunch of YouTube videos made by one guy. This one guy, Filthy Frank, is an okay YouTuber in the grand scheme of things, but he's not that memorable in of himself. Because he chooses to satirize a bunch of YouTubers, his content is a reflection of a reflection. Well, media does that thing where it reflects back what people see of themselves and of others. So, we can't really say much about this book without going into tangents on broader subjects like adaptation sickness and satire. Really, the book does not stand on its own, and because it does not stand on its own 2 feet, it's just an homage to past videos which were satire. And an homage of satire is not necessarily satire also, so everything I just said about satire and not satire is almost irrelevant to Francis of the Filth writ large. It's just that it's connected to a larger brand. The only really unique aspect of Francis of the Filth that's worth talking about is that it finally goes over Filthy Frank's backstory, which is that he was always a weirdo. He was born weird. He grew up weird. He was abducted and groomed by Japanese World War II imperialist apologists, and forced to do radioactive research on genetics. That's where the whole chromosomes etymology comes from. And even that is just, here's how he began, and does not say more than that. Is that good enough for you, sir? Part of me had a plan, and that plan was going over specific examples of what was satire and was incorrigible, what was satire and was good, what was not satire and was incorrigible, and what was not satire but was still good. I ran afoul of the problem where I could not detect anything that I liked being genuine satire, at least without an absurdly high reading comprehension. So I just ended up using this visual shorthand to go over the examples I was gonna go over in as little detail as possible because I'm not really sure if it would be worth the effort. Look at this graph!